Welcome to you, our listener, to this deep dive on Under the Hood.
We are so glad you're here with us.
We really are. And we are broadcasting today, as always, from the little station on Commercial Street in Atchison, Kansas, Chesterton Radio.
The absolute best place to be.
Exactly. And, usually when we think about the modern boardroom or just corporate culture in general, there is this prevailing expectation of just absolute ruthlessness.
Oh, yeah. Cutthroat.
Right. It's treated like a battlefield. You look at a quarterly earnings report, you see a jagged red line pointing down, and the board just points to the CEO and basically says, cut the head count.
Yeah, it's entirely transactional.
Completely.
It is entirely binary. You are either operating at a profit or a loss, and the culture tells us that every single human decision within that organization has to be subordinate to that binary.
Cutthroat or be cut.
Yeah.
And it feels clean in a really brutal sort of way.
Yeah.
You don't have to wrestle with the moral weight of laying off 100 people if the spreadsheet simply dictates that, it must be done to save the margin.
Right. And because it feels clean, it's a game we have been deeply conditioned to just accept.
We don't even question it.
We don't. We like the metrics to be visible. We like success to be categorized entirely by the bottom line because, honestly, it requires less moral imagination. In the corporate universe, this isn't just a strategy. It is treated as an unquestioned law of physics.
And this is where we get into the meat of today's deep dive. What if that entire premise is a false choice?
A total miss.
Right. What if the idea that you have to, leave your conscience at the door to build a successful company is actually just a modern myth?
Because when you step into the world of theology, of vocational calling, and of human flourishing, that clean binary spreadsheet it's torn to pieces.
Completely shredded.
We start looking at a professional landscape that is infinitely more complicated, and I would say infinitely more beautiful than a simple profit margin.
It requires a total paradigm shift.
It really does. We are talking about fundamentally redefining what it means to succeed as a human being who happens to be in business rather than a business person who happens to be human.
And that is exactly the paradigm shift we are going to explore today. Today's theme is something that might completely reframe the way you, our listener, look at your Monday morning alarm clock.
I know it reframed mine.
Same here. We are exploring the emergence of a new generation of Catholic entrepreneurs, investors, engineers, and founders who view their daily work not merely as a career, but as a profound Christian vocation.
And to do this properly, we're pulling from a remarkably diverse stack of sources today.
It's a big stack.
It is. We are going to anchor our conversation in the story and philosophy of a community called Cent Ventures.
Founded by John Cannon.
Right, founded by John Cannon. But to understand why Cent and organizations like it even exist, we have to pull back the lens.
We have to look at the foundations.
Exactly. So we'll be diving into the foundational documents of Catholic social teaching. So we're talking about documents like Pope Benedict XVI's encyclical Caritas in Veritate.
Which is fantastic.
It really is. And we're also looking at Pope John Paul II's Centesimus Annus and Laborum Exercens, as well as the compendium of the social doctrine of the Church.
Which I know sounds like a lot of really heavy theology.
It can feel dense.
Yeah. But we're also pairing it with highly practical, boots-on-the-ground insights from the Culture Project, the Catholic Business Journal, and just the broader movement of Catholic professionals finding their footing in the modern marketplace.
Because our mission today is to discover how faith, business excellence, and human flourishing actually intersect in the real world.
And we want to explore how you can apply these massive, world-altering concepts to your own daily grind.
Right.
Because it genuinely doesn't matter if you are a CEO scaling a venture-backed tech startup or, a college student trying to figure out your major.
Or a civil engineer writing safety reports.
Exactly. Or a parent managing the chaotic logistics of a household. The principles of human dignity and holy work are completely universal.
They apply to everyone.
But before we really get the engine running here, I think it's important to lay down a quick boundary for the deep dive.
Yeah, a quick rule check.
Right. The sources we are looking at today touch heavily on economic systems. They talk about wealth, the free market, private enterprise, and the rights of workers.
And in our current cultural climate, those are topics that instantly become politically charged.
Oh, immediately.
Yeah.
It's very easy to try and map these philosophical texts onto modern American political platforms.
Which is exactly what we are not going to do.
Exactly. So just a quick rule check for our listeners. This deep dive is going to look impartially at the original texts, without endorsing any specific political wing's economic agenda.
We aren't taking sides on modern left versus right political debates.
Nope. We are just here to convey the ideas contained in the original source material and see what they have to say about the fundamental nature of the human person.
Which is the right approach, honestly, because the church's social doctrine operates on an entirely different axis than our modern political spectrum.
Yeah, it doesn't fit neatly into those boxes.
It doesn't. It doesn't ask, is this policy capitalist or socialist? It asks, does this system elevate or degrade human dignity?
That's the core question. So let's jump right in.
Yeah.
I want to start by examining what I call the prevailing modern assumption, this massive false dichotomy we've set up in our culture.
The worldly success versus spiritual values divide.
Exactly. It's this pervasive idea that forces entrepreneurs and professionals to choose. The culture whispers and sometimes shouts that you either build a unicorn startup or you become a monk.
Right. You can't do both.
You can't do both. But these sources provide us with a story of one man, John Cannon, whose life basically torpedoes that assumption.
His trajectory is just fascinating because he didn't start on the fringes of the business world.
Not at all.
If you look at John Cannon's early resume, it is the quintessential textbook blueprint for elite worldly success. He was collecting accolades at the highest possible level.
Just absolutely crushing it on paper.
Right. He holds degrees in finance, political science, and business from Notre Dame, Oxford, and Harvard Business School.
I mean, just one of those is enough to secure a very comfortable life. He had the trifecta.
Exactly, and he utilized it. He was an investment banker. He worked in boutique management consulting.
Which, for those unfamiliar, essentially means he was part of small, highly specialized teams hired by massive corporations to come in, analyze their operations, and tell them how to maximize their efficiency and profitability.
A very high-stress, high-reward environment.
Very much so. And he was even a policy advisor to the governor of Alabama.
He was on the fast track to the absolute pinnacle of corporate and political power. He was playing the game, he knew the rules, and by every modern metric, he was winning.
If you looked at his LinkedIn profile, you would think, this guy has it all figured out.
But the sources reveal a massive internal disconnect.
Yeah, a real tension there.
Despite all this external validation and worldly success, he felt profoundly unfulfilled. He came face to face with what he described as the amoral nature of modern business.
And we should clarify what we mean by amoral here.
Right. When we say amoral, we don't necessarily mean immoral or actively evil. We mean a system that operates completely devoid of moral considerations.
Right. A system where the only question is, can we do this profitably, rather than should we do this?
Exactly. He was chasing the resume, climbing the ladder, and he realized that the ladder was leaning against the wrong wall. It was leaving him spiritually empty.
I think so many people listening to this right now can relate to that exact feeling.
The Sunday night dread?
Yes.
Yeah.
The Sunday night dread. The feeling that your daily labor has absolutely no connection to your soul. So Cannon hits this wall. And during a particularly challenging time in his life, he has this intense, transformative spiritual encounter.
And what he does next is completely radical.
He doesn't just switch firms or take a sabbatical. He walks away from it all. He leaves the Harvard network, the investment banking salary, the political influence, and he joins a Carmelite monastery.
Which is a staggering pivot. To go from the boardrooms of elite consulting firms to a monastery is one thing, but to join the Carmelites?
Yeah, that's intense.
An order known for deep contemplative prayer, silence, and a strict vow of poverty? It's a complete rejection of the power structures he had spent his life climbing.
For 7 years, he lived as a Carmelite friar. He lived in the Western United States and in Africa. He immersed himself in a monastic life of prayer, study, and service.
I'm just trying to picture the culture shock. One day you are analyzing multi-million-dollar mergers, and the next you are in absolute silence, owning literally nothing, sweeping a floor in a monastery.
Right. But the sources point out that this time in the monastery wasn't just an escape hatch.
No, not at all.
He wasn't just hiding from the corporate world. It actually became a laboratory for him.
That's a crucial distinction. While he was there, he was completing advanced degrees in philosophy and theology. And his analytical mind, the mind of a management consultant, didn't just turn off.
He couldn't just switch that part of his brain off.
Right. He started applying that analytical rigor to the history of the church. He started studying the lives of founder saints. He was looking at how these massive, enduring spiritual movements were actually built.
But then, after almost 8 years as a friar, the story takes another wild turn.
A really painful one for him, actually.
Yeah, he does something that he described as the hardest decision of his life. He discerns out of the monastery. He realizes that his lifelong vocation is actually not to be a monk.
He felt this inescapable burning pull to start something specifically for Catholic entrepreneurs.
So he leaves the monastery, and because of that vow of poverty he'd lived under for years, he leaves with literally $0 to his name.
Nothing.
He moves into his aunt's 1970s-style basement in Virginia.
It has all the classic beats of a Silicon Valley startup origin story. You know, the guy in the basement with an idea, but with a deeply spiritual, almost painful twist.
Yeah, it's not a garage in Palo Alto. It's an aunt's basement in Virginia.
Right. He had this vision to empower a generation of saintly builders. But the reality of his situation was incredibly stark. He openly admits that he had been completely out of the business world for 8 years.
And think about how much technology, media, and the corporate landscape change in 8 years.
8 years in business terms is a century.
Literally a century.
Precisely. He had no network in the startup space. He had no financial resources to even pay his own rent, let alone hire a team or build an app. He was starting from absolute sub-zero.
And yet, out of that basement, he builds Scent Ventures. And the foundational reason Scent exists, according to Cannon, is because of a specific pain point he identified.
The isolation.
Yes, Catholic entrepreneurs face this massive, crushing isolation at the top. They face relentless, systemic pressure to compromise their values for the sake of profit.
And that observation gets right to the heart of the false dichotomy you mentioned earlier.
Right.
Entrepreneurs are explicitly told they have to play by the world's rules if they want venture capital funding or if they want to survive in a competitive market.
The prevailing culture dictates that business is a secular space where spiritual values are, at best, a private hobby you leave at the door.
Exactly. You operate on the strict principle of profit maximization, and maybe if you're wildly successful and have a liquidity event, you write a big charity check at the end of your career to soothe your conscience.
The classic philanthropic wash. You
Yeah.
spend 40 years exploiting the system, and then you build a library with your name on it to balance the cosmic scales.
But Scent Ventures and John Cannon argue that these are false limits imposed by a broken culture. The psychological and spiritual toll this compartmentalization takes on a founder is immense.
It fractures you.
It does. When you fracture your life when you are a ruthless, corner-cutting pragmatist from Monday to Friday and a devout, loving believer on Sunday, you literally lose your integrity.
And you mean integrity in the structural sense, right?
In the structural sense of the word, being whole, undivided, and structurally sound. Cannon realized that the isolation Catholic founders were feeling wasn't just a lack of LinkedIn connections.
It was deeper than that.
It was a lack of a community that understood this very specific, agonizing spiritual struggle.
Okay, I hear all of this, but I want to push back a little bit. Let's play devil's advocate for a second.
Sure.
If I'm a founder listening to this, I might say, look, this all sounds incredibly noble, but modern business is a zero-sum game. I am competing against people who are perfectly willing to cut corners, who will happily underpay foreign workers, and who will exploit user data to gain a competitive edge.
Yeah, that's the reality of the market.
Right. If I don't do those things, I lose. My company dies. Isn't the primary overriding purpose of a business just to make money and survive? If you focus too much on kingdom impact or being a saintly builder, aren't you just signing your own bankruptcy papers? Doesn't the global market inherently punish idealism?
That is the exact tension that keeps so many ethical founders awake at night staring at the ceiling.
It's terrifying.
It is a deeply rational fear, but to address it, the sources tell us we have to completely shift our focus. We can't start by analyzing market competition.
We have to zoom out.
We have to zoom all the way out and ask a much more foundational philosophical question. Why does work even exist in the first place?
And this brings us into the rich theology of work, which is heavily explored in the papal encyclicals we're examining today.
Let's dive into those documents, because this is where the paradigm shift really happens.
I want to look at Laborem Exercens, which translates to On Human Work. This was written by Pope John Paul II in 1981.
And the historical context here is wild.
It really is. It's 1981. Automation is rising rapidly in factories. The global industrial revolution has evolved into a technological one, and the Cold War is raging.
So you have the capitalist West and the communist East locked in this ideological battle over the nature of economics.
Right in the middle of this, John Paul II comes out and says something totally radical about the fundamental nature of work itself.
What is so striking about Laborum Exercens is how it completely dismantles the cultural assumption that work is just a necessary evil.
We often have this subconscious idea that work is a punishment for the fall of man in the Garden of Eden.
Right, that if Adam and Eve hadn't eaten the apple, we'd all just be lying in hammocks all day.
Drinking pina colada.
Exactly. But John Paul II argues that work is a fundamental, essential dimension of human existence. It existed before the fall. When God, in the book of Genesis, said to subdue the earth, he was issuing a mandate to work.
It's not a punishment, it's an invitation to participate in creation.
That's the key concept right there. The encyclical argues that God is the creator, and human beings made in his image are called to be sub-creators.
Sub-creators, I love that term.
When we work, we are literally sharing in the ongoing activity of the creator. And the encyclical points out a historical fact that is so obvious we often completely overlook it. Jesus himself was a man of work.
He was a carpenter.
Yes. For the vast majority of his life on earth, roughly 30 years, he wasn't preaching to multitudes or performing public miracles.
He was working a blue-collar trade.
He was working with wood. He was likely fulfilling orders for clients. He was probably dealing with difficult customers or supply chain issues with timber. He intimately knew the reality of physical labor.
Furthermore, the encyclical points to St. Paul, who was a tent maker.
Right. St. Paul famously boasted in his letters about earning his own bread with his own hands so he wouldn't be a financial burden to the communities he was preaching to.
It is a profound dignifying of the daily grind. It elevates the mundane to the sacred. It reminds me of the British writer Dorothy Sayers.
Oh, she's brilliant.
She is. She wrote this incredible essay called Why Work, where she argues that work shouldn't be seen as something we do just to extract enough money to survive so we can go do what we actually want to do.
Right, like work is just a means to an end.
Exactly. She argues that work is the natural exercise of our human faculties. It's meant to be a medium for our own perfection.
And that leads perfectly into the next major encyclical in our stack, Centesimus Annus, which John Paul II wrote 10 years later in 1991.
And the timing here is, again, crucial.
The Berlin Wall has fallen, the Soviet Union is collapsing, the command economy model of communism has objectively failed.
John Paul II looks at the emerging new global economy, and he identifies a massive shift. He points out that wealth today isn't just about owning vast tracts of land or hoarding natural resources anymore, like it was in the feudal era.
Right, the nature of capital itself has changed.
Exactly. He identifies that a new form of ownership is becoming dominant, the possession of know-how, of technology, and of skill.
The principal resource of mankind, he argues, is man himself. It is human intelligence. It is the ability to foresee the needs of others and the capacity to organize a complex, productive effort to meet those needs.
There is a phrase he uses in that document that I absolutely love. He calls work a community of persons.
It's a beautiful phrase, and it completely changes the framework of how we view a company.
Yeah, a business is not just a machine designed to extract profit, and employees are not just cogs in that machine.
A business is a society. If you are a founder or an entrepreneur organizing a productive effort, if you are planning its duration and taking the necessary personal and financial risks to satisfy human needs, you are doing something inherently valuable.
The encyclical explicitly states that this kind of entrepreneurial work requires specific virtues: diligence, industriousness, prudence in taking reasonable risks, reliability, and courage.
These aren't just business skills, they are fundamentally holy virtues being exercised in the public square.
And the compendium of the social doctrine of the church, which is essentially a massive synthesis of all these teachings, takes it even further.
It does.
It says point blank that work is a means of sanctification. It is not meant to be a perpetual source of anxiety. And it emphasizes a foundational rule: human labor always has priority over capital.
People are always unconditionally more important than the tools they use, the technology they leverage, or the profit they generate.
If we bring this all the way back to John Cannon's realization in the Carmelite monastery, it suddenly makes perfect logical sense.
He was sitting there in contemplative silence, and he realized that his specific professional gifts, his management consulting ability to analyze data, organize teams, and build structures, weren't meant to be permanently buried in the desert.
God gave him those specific tools for a reason.
The active nature of a CEO, a founder, or a structural engineer is just as much a divine calling as the contemplative life of a monk, provided that the work is ordered correctly toward human flourishing.
We have another source in the stack, a piece from the Catholic Business Journal, that highlights St. Joseph as the ultimate historical model for this kind of integrated life.
Yeah, they describe him as a silent, fiercely obedient guardian who labored daily to support the Holy Family.
He is literally the patron saint of workers. He didn't build a global empire. He didn't scale a startup to $1 billion valuation. He worked a local physical trade to put food on the table.
But that labor was intrinsically holy because of the love and obedience poured into it.
It grounds all this high-level papal theology in gritty, everyday reality. You do not have to be founding a multinational tech corporation to be doing holy work.
The scale of the work doesn't dictate its holiness. The nature of the work and the disposition of the worker do.
Okay, let me throw another analogy at you then. Let's talk about the weekend warrior.
Oh, boy.
This is the modern worker who endures the absolute misery of their job from Monday morning to Friday afternoon. They sit in a gray cubicle, they have a strained relationship with their boss, and they feel like their soul is being slowly siphoned out through their keyboard as they enter data into a system they don't care about.
A very common experience.
Right. They endure all of this just so they can clock out and truly live their real life on the weekend. Does laborum exercens seriously mean that even writing lines of code for an obscure app or analyzing a dreary spreadsheet for a massive insurance company is somehow a divine creative act? Because to the person doing it, it feels like a soul-crushing grind.
That is a very real, very painful experience for millions of people. And it raises an incredibly important point about the alienation of modern work.
Because it feels so disconnected.
If a worker feels like their soul is being sucked out, that is actually a symptom of an economic system that has failed. It means the work has been stripped of its human element, which is exactly what these encyclicals heavily critique.
A system that reduces a human being to an instrument of production is objectively flawed.
However, to answer your question directly, yes, the act of work itself can still be sanctified. The compendium reminds us that any honest labor, when united with the Spirit of Christ, cooperates with the work of redemption.
So even the spreadsheet.
The spreadsheet itself might be mundane, the data entry might be tedious, but the diligence required to do it well, the honesty to not cut corners, and the love required to endure it to provide for one's family, those realities elevate the mundane spreadsheet into something deeply holy.
So it's about the interior disposition of the worker, just as much as the exterior product of the work. You can be doing those boring tasks in the world, but if you're doing it with excellence and love for your family, it's sanctified.
Precisely. It's the invisible weight of what you bring to the work. But, and this is a massive but, that theological truth does not let the employer off the hook. The employer has a grave, non-negotiable moral duty to structure the work environment in a way that respects the dignity of the human person. You cannot just give someone a soul-crushing job, underpay them, and tell them to offer it up for their sanctification. That is an abuse of theology.
That friction you're talking about, the gap between the ideal of holy work and the messy reality of running a company, that actually begs a much deeper question.
Which is?
If work is this divine creative act, how do we actually build organizations that reflect that?
Yeah.
How does a founder practically structure a company so it doesn't crush its employees?
And this brings us back to John Cannon's research.
He didn't just meditate on this problem. He actively researched it. While he was in the Carmelite order, he studied over 50 saintly founders who launched enduring religious orders, hospitals, universities, and movements throughout the history of the church.
And what he discovered in that research completely shatters our modern sanitized stereotypes of saints.
We often picture saints as these passive, ethereal figures just, floating on clouds with their hands folded in perpetual prayer.
But Cannon found that these historical founders were fiercely, ruthlessly entrepreneurial. They knew how to marshal massive resources.
They mobilized huge teams of people across continents.
They dealt with complex logistics, supply chains, funding crises, and intense political opposition from both the state and the church. They were, as Cannon puts it, wise in the ways of God, but also wise in the ways of the world when they needed to be.
He distilled this historical research down into what he calls 5 key traits that modern founders can learn from. Let's walk through these because this is where the theology turns into a practical blueprint. Trait number 1, seeking God first. And the foundational phrase he uses here is, action follows being.
This is a core philosophical concept that goes all the way back to classical philosophy, but is deeply embedded in Catholic thought. Action follows being means that what you do in the external world inevitably flows from who you are in your interior life.
Ontology precedes action.
A founder absolutely cannot build a healthy, integrated, flourishing company if their own spiritual, mental, and personal life is in absolute chaos.
If you as a leader are running on empty, if you are fueled by anxiety, unresolved trauma, or a desperate, grasping need for worldly validation, your company's culture will inevitably reflect that toxicity.
It will bleed into how you treat your direct reports. By seeking God first, by prioritizing interior silence and prayer, founders gain the clarity, the humility, and the emotional regulation needed to actually inspire and lead others effectively.
It's the ultimate airplane safety brief.
Mm-hmm.
Put your own oxygen mask on first before assisting others, but apply it on a spiritual and psychological level.
That's a great way to put it.
Okay, trait number 2, wholeness and integration.
The historical example Cannon uses here is absolutely brilliant. He points to Saint Teresa of Avila.
She was a 16th century Spanish mystic, right?
Right, a brilliant writer and the founder of the Discalced Carmelites. She was a massive reformer who faced intense pushback. But when she was writing the rules for her convents, she specifically mandated time for sleep, recreation, and good food in the daily schedules of her nuns.
She deeply understood human nature.
She knew that you cannot sustain a high-level spiritual or practical mission if you are burning out your human capital. You are in a body and a soul, and if the body breaks down, the mission stops.
Which is such a massive counter-narrative to modern Silicon Valley hustle culture. We have a culture where tech founders literally brag on podcasts about sleeping 3 hours a night under their desks, drinking meal replacement shakes so they don't have to stop coding, and working 100-hour weeks.
It's celebrated.
And here is Saint Teresa of Avila, a mystic who experienced divine ecstasies, essentially saying, go to sleep, eat a good meal. Taking care of your body is holy. I love that so much.
It's incredibly practical.
Let's look at trait number 3, self-knowledge and world awareness.
For this trait, Cannon looks at St. Ignatius of Loyola, the founder of the Jesuits. Ignatius's backstory is key here. Before his profound conversion, he was a Basque soldier.
He was vain, he was aggressive, and he was deeply imbued with the adventurous, conquest-driven conquistador spirit of his era.
When he converted, he didn't just throw away his military background or his natural aggression. He repurposed it. He harnessed that exact same conquistador spirit and challenged men to become conquistadors for souls.
He structured the Jesuits with military-like discipline and obedience.
He was deeply aware of his own innate strengths, and he was keenly attuned to the cultural language of his time. Cannon argues that modern entrepreneurs need that exact same acute self-awareness.
You don't have to become someone else to be holy. You have to take your specific leverage points, your specific quirks and talents, and order them toward the good.
Exactly.
Trait number 4, starting with immediate needs.
Mother Teresa is the prime example Cannon uses here. Before she formally founded the Missionaries of Charity, before it became a massive, globally recognized NGO with thousands of sisters, she didn't sit in a boardroom writing a 10-year strategic plan.
She didn't launch a massive fundraising campaign.
She just went out into the slums of Calcutta, found the poorest, most destitute person she could find dying in the street, and she started helping that one specific person. She responded to the immediate, tangible need right in front of her.
Okay, I have to jump in here with a business analogy because the parallel is just too perfect. Mother Teresa is basically doing exactly what Silicon Valley preaches today when they talk about a minimum viable product or an MVP.
Oh, that's interesting.
For our listeners who might not be in the startup space, an MVP is the idea that you don't spend 5 years and millions of dollars building the perfect massive software platform before you show it to a customer.
You test it first.
You build the smallest, simplest version of the solution, you find one user, you solve their specific problem, and you prove the concept works. Mother Teresa didn't build a hospital first. Her MVP was literally picking up one person from the gutter.
That is a very pragmatic, modern way to frame it, but the underlying mechanism is exactly the same. The principle is that you don't allow yourself to get paralyzed by the overwhelming scale of the grand vision.
You execute on the immediate reality.
You do the next right thing, and you let the scale grow organically from that authentic foundation.
And that brings us to the final trait, trait number 5, emerging from the margins and embracing suffering. Saints often came from unexpected, marginalized places, and more importantly, they recognized that suffering wasn't a glitch in the matrix to be avoided at all costs, but a reality that could be redemptive and formative.
This is a tough one for the modern mind.
But I need you to explain the mechanism here for me. In a business context, how on earth does embracing suffering actually help a startup?
To understand how powerful this is, think about the modern startup ecosystem we've seen over the last 10 years, heavily fueled by zero interest rate venture capital.
Free money, basically.
The explicit goal for many of these companies was perpetual comfort. They offered highly subsidized lifestyle perks, catered lunches, unlimited nap pods, and they operated on the assumption of infinite financial runway.
And the moment the macroeconomic market tightened.
Thousands of those companies instantly collapsed. Why? Because they had built no calluses. They had no institutional resilience.
Embracing suffering in a business context means willingly entering into the hard things.
It might mean choosing to bootstrap your company with your own savings rather than taking easy venture capital that forces you to compromise your values. It might mean operating with incredibly lean margins.
It might mean making the agonizing, painful choice to fire a toxic high performer who brings in revenue but destroys your company culture.
Doing these hard, painful things builds organizational anti-fragility. It forces a company to rely on its core mission and structural integrity rather than artificial, comfortable stimulants.
So it's the difference between a company built on a solid rock of discipline versus a company built on the sand of cheap capital.
Exactly.
But this brings me back to my earlier skepticism. It is very easy to see how this saintly blueprint works for a charity, a religious order, or a nonprofit.
Right.
But can a venture-backed startup, or even just a mid-sized local plumbing logistics business, truly apply these traits without getting absolutely crushed by competitors?
Yeah.
If a tech CEO prioritizes prayer, mandates reasonable working hours, and refuses to cut ethical corners, won't a ruthless competitor just steal their market share and eat their lunch?
That is the ultimate fear. It's the fear that virtue is inherently a competitive disadvantage in a fallen world.
Yeah.
But if we look closely at the data emerging from values-based businesses, and if we look at the philosophy of human flourishing, it actually argues the exact opposite. If a founder is integrated, well-rested, and operating out of clear self-knowledge rather than manic anxiety, they make objectively better long-term strategic decisions.
That makes sense.
If a company treats its employees with genuine dignity, paying them well, respecting their family time, retention skyrockets, institutional knowledge is preserved, creativity and loyalty increase.
The ruthless burn and churn model might produce a quick artificial quarterly spike to please shareholders, but it is fundamentally unsustainable.
The saintly blueprint isn't about avoiding hard work or being naive. It's about making the work sustainable, resilient, and ordered toward actual human good, which ultimately creates a much stronger enterprise.
Okay, so nap times, prayer, and ethical supply chains sound amazing in theory. But let's be real. A lone founder trying to do this by themselves, swimming against the current of the entire global economy, is going to get exhausted and probably crushed.
Oh, without a doubt.
Without a support system, the isolation we talked about earlier will just creep right back in. Who is actually funding, supporting, and mentoring these people?
And that brings us to the tangible communities actively proving that this works. Let's look at the ecosystem John Cannon built with Cent Ventures and how it fits into a broader cultural renewal.
John Cannon recognized exactly what you just said. You cannot simply hand an entrepreneur a book on Catholic theology, tell them to be holy, and send them back into the cutthroat market completely alone.
You have to build a structural ecosystem around them.
So Cent Ventures was designed to operate almost like a Silicon Valley incubator or accelerator, but entirely rooted in Catholic values.
They built fellowship cohorts, which place founders in small, intimate groups for high-level peer coaching and spiritual support.
They host the annual Cent Summit, which is a massive gathering. Last year, they brought together nearly 400 founders, CEOs, and investors to share best practices.
And crucially, they recognized the funding gap, so they spun out Cent Angels, which is a network of angel investors specifically dedicated to funding early-stage startups that advance Catholic values and human flourishing.
It's an entire parallel infrastructure. And we should note that Cent isn't operating in a vacuum. The focus of our research points out that they are part of a much broader renewal of Catholic professionals seeking this exact kind of integration.
You have organizations like Legatus, which has been gathering Catholic executives for decades to integrate their faith in corporate lives.
You have the Napa Institute fostering high-level dialogue between faith and culture.
You have the Acton Institute deeply exploring the intersection of free market economics and moral theology. There's a massive growing appetite among business leaders who are tired of the fractured, compartmentalized life.
Exactly. It is a movement. And the sources give us very concrete examples of entrepreneurs who are thriving within this scent ecosystem.
Look at Nick Madden. He runs a company called Red Door Escape Room. He joined Scent right during the height of the COVID-19 pandemic.
Which was a time when his physical in-person entertainment business was facing total catastrophic shutdown.
He credits the Scent community with becoming a lifeline, helping him navigate that crisis without abandoning his values. He became so integrated into the mission that John Cannon recently transitioned leadership and named Nick Madden as the new CEO of Scent Ventures.
And the scale isn't just small local businesses. The sources mention figures like Alex Jones, the CEO of Hallow.
For those who don't know, Hallow is a Catholic prayer and meditation app. It has raised over $100 million in venture capital, it has over 20 million downloads, and it even bought ad space during the Super Bowl.
Or look at Scott Wieman, the founder of Catholic in Recovery, who is doing incredible work in the addiction space. These are individuals scaling massive, highly impactful operations while remaining deeply anchored in this ecosystem of faith and accountability.
But what I find most compelling in our source stack is how they tie this entrepreneurial movement to a seemingly unrelated organization, the Culture Project.
Yes. When I first read the research packet, I was genuinely confused by this.
It seems like a stretch at first glance.
The Culture Project is an organization that trains teams of young missionaries and sends them into middle schools and high schools to speak to teenagers about human dignity, sexual integrity, and healthy social media use.
On the surface, a chaotic high school cafeteria and a high-stakes corporate boardroom seem like two entirely different universes.
I initially thought their inclusion in this deep dive was a typo. What is the actual connection there?
It seems like a typo until you look at the underlying psychological and spiritual diagnosis of both demographics. The Culture Project notes that our modern secular culture hands young people what they call counterfeit versions of love and freedom.
Which leaves teenagers wildly anxious, overwhelmed by the constant comparison trap of social media, and fundamentally deeply lonely, even when they are hyper-connected online.
Now look at John Cannon's diagnosis of the entrepreneurial world. He identified the exact same structural disease, immense isolation at the top, and the relentless pressure to compromise your soul for a counterfeit version of success.
Both organizations, the Culture Project for teens and Scent for CEOs, have realized that human beings simply cannot survive, let alone flourish, in a vacuum.
We desperately need physical community. We need peer mentorship. Whether you are a 16-year-old trying to navigate the social minefield of high school or a 40-year-old founder trying to navigate a series of venture funding round, you need a community that looks at you and reflects your true inherent dignity back to you, rather than just measuring your utility.
Oh, wow. The disease is identical. It just manifests differently based on the age and tax bracket of the patient.
That's exactly it.
So investing in holy entrepreneurship or mentoring a young founder isn't just about making better, slightly more ethical widgets. It is fundamentally about changing the broader culture.
If a business leader models true virtue, emotional regulation, and justice, that behavior ripples outward.
It impacts their employees. It changes how they treat their suppliers. It respects their consumers and allows their workers to go home and be present for their families. It creates a localized microculture of human flourishing.
It's an incarnational approach to business. And when theologians use the word incarnational, they mean taking these high, abstract, spiritual concepts like love, justice, and dignity and making them physical, putting flesh and blood on them in the real world. A business is a physical incarnation of the founder's values.
I love that concept. But let me challenge this ecosystem model one more time. I look at Scent Ventures, and it sounds incredible, but is there a danger here that Catholic entrepreneurs are just creating a highly insulated, comfortable bubble?
It's a valid concern.
Are they just going to build Catholic apps exclusively for Catholic consumers, hire only Catholic employees, and get all their funding from Catholic angel investors? Doesn't that directly contradict the Christian mandate to go out and engage with the secular world? Are we just retreating to a well-funded bunker?
That is a very valid critique, and it's a known temptation in any faith-based initiative. It's easy to retreat. But if we consult the source documents, specifically the heavy-hitting encyclicals of Catholic social teaching, the goal of these enterprises is explicitly aggressively outward-facing.
The ultimate goal is not to build a safe little parallel economy for believers. The goal is the moral transformation of the global economy itself.
And that brings us to the final major theme of our deep dive, redefining profit and the civilizing of the economy.
Yes, this is where the rubber really meets the road. Let's look at Pope Benedict XVI's 2009 encyclical, Caritas in Veritate, which translates to charity in truth.
This document is an absolute powerhouse.
Again, the historical context is vital. It was written in 2009, right in the smoking crater of the 2008 global financial crisis, when the entire world saw the devastating consequences of unchecked greed and toxic financial instruments.
Benedict XVI addresses this crisis head-on, but he doesn't take the easy, populist route of just condemning capitalism wholesale.
He states very clearly that the free market is not inherently evil. The Church does not teach that business is inherently opposed to society. The market is simply an instrument.
But, he argues, it is an instrument that is shaped by the cultural and moral configurations of the people using it. If the underlying culture is selfish, greedy, and views human beings as expendable resources, the market will inevitably become a brutal tool of exploitation.
Therefore, every single instance of economic activity must be consciously directed toward the pursuit of the common good, not merely the creation of wealth for a select few.
He introduces a phrase in that document that I find deeply challenging. He talks about the principle of gratuitousness and the logic of gift.
He says that these concepts must find their place within normal economic activity, not just in charity after the fact. What did that actually look like on a random Tuesday afternoon in a corporate office?
It means we have to completely dismantle the idea that business and charity are two separate sequential phases of life. The old, broken model was make ruthless, maximize profits first, regardless of the human or environmental cost, and then donate a portion of that money to charity later to balance the scales.
Benedict XVI says no. Justice and the logic of gift, the recognition that everything we have, including our talents and our capital, is a sheer gift from God, must permeate the daily operational mechanics of the firm.
The way you negotiate a contract with a supplier, the way you structure your financing, the environmental impact of your manufacturing, the wages and working conditions of your line workers, all of it has immediate moral implications.
You cannot exploit a worker on Tuesday and then hand them a turkey on Thanksgiving and call it justice.
Okay, but what about profit? Because if I'm a CEO, I have a fiduciary duty to keep the company alive. Are we saying profit is inherently bad? John Paul II addressed this heavily in Centesimus Annus, right?
Right, and John Paul II is very clear, very pragmatic about this. The Church absolutely acknowledges the legitimate, necessary role of profit.
Profit is a vital indicator that a business is functioning well. It shows that productive factors are being employed efficiently, resources aren't being wasted, and human needs are actually being met by the market.
However, and this is the crucial revolutionary pivot, profit is not the only indicator of a company's health.
The encyclical points out that a firm can have absolutely perfect financial accounts. It can be generating record-breaking profits, and yet the workers, who are the firm's most valuable asset, could be humiliated, underpaid, and their dignity completely offended.
A profitable company that destroys its people is a failed enterprise in the eyes of the Church.
This makes me think of G.K. Chesterton. He wrote extensively about economics, specifically advocating for a system called distributism.
And Chesterton had this great earthy analogy where he said that property and capital are a lot like muck or manure. They're really only good if they're spread around to help things grow.
If you pile it all up in one massive heap, it just stinks and becomes toxic.
And the encyclical seemed to echo this by calling for a plurality of business forms.
Right.
We are so deeply conditioned to a binary system. You are either a ruthless, maximizing for-profit corporation, or you are a non-profit charity entirely dependent on begging for donations.
But the Church envisions a much more articulated, diverse economy. It advocates for traditional profit-based companies, but also mutualist societies, employee-owned cooperatives, credit unions, and businesses that pursue social ends while remaining fiercely commercially viable.
And all of this ties into a foundational pillar of Catholic social teaching, the concept of subsidiarity.
Okay, subsidiarity is a heavy policy word. Explain it to me like I'm 5.
Subsidiarity is the principle that problems should be handled by the smallest, lowest, or least centralized competent authority. You don't ask the federal government to fix a pothole on your street if the local town council can do it.
Applied to business, subsidiarity means a company shouldn't just view itself as a giant, centralized wealth extraction machine designed to siphon money out of local communities and send it to distant, anonymous shareholders.
A business must view itself as a community of solidarity. It should empower its workers to make decisions. It should be deeply embedded in and responsible to the local town or city where it operates.
Which is a direct, stinging critique of what Caritas in Veritate calls the new cosmopolitan class of managers.
It is a devastating critique. Benedict XVI is calling out modern corporate managers who are completely detached from the physical reality of their businesses.
These managers are often only answerable to massive, anonymous international shareholder funds. Those funds dictate executive remuneration based purely on short-term, quarterly financial returns.
When a manager lives thousands of miles away and is completely disconnected from the local territory, the local environment, and the actual human workers on the factory floor, they make decisions that look incredibly efficient on a spreadsheet, but are humanly devastating in reality.
The relentless outsourcing of production purely defined the cheapest, most exploitable labor, while ignoring the destruction of the local community left behind. That is the inevitable result of a business culture detached from ethics and subsidiarity.
Okay, let me use an analogy here to see if I'm tracking this perfectly. Let's say profit is exactly like oxygen. You absolutely need oxygen to survive. If you stop breathing, you die quickly.
If a business stops making a profit, it dies. You can't pay your workers if you are bankrupt.
But breathing isn't the purpose of your life. You don't wake up in the morning and say, my sole goal today is to breathe as much oxygen as possible.
You breathe so that you can love your family, create art, build a home, help your neighbor. Profit is the oxygen of business. It is required for survival, but it is not the purpose of the business.
That is a phenomenal analogy. You've hit the nail on the head. The purpose of the business is the production of genuinely useful goods and services, and the flourishing of the community of persons involved in it.
Profit is the fuel that allows that purpose to continue. When you confuse the fuel for the purpose, the engine explodes.
But let me push back one final time with a hard reality check. I understand the theology. I love the oxygen analogy. But how does a CEO practically apply this principle of gratuitousness when they have a board of venture capitalists breathing down their neck demanding 10x quarterly growth?
Doesn't the global market inherently punish this kind of idealism?
If I decide to pay my factory workers a thriving living wage, and I choose to source my materials ethically rather than using cheap exploitative supply chains, my margins shrink. My ruthless competitor undercuts my price on Amazon, consumers choose the cheaper option, and I go out of business. My ethical company dies, and the ruthless company wins. How do we solve that?
It is a massive, incredibly difficult challenge. And the papal encyclicals do not pretend it's easy. They don't offer a magic wand. But this is exactly why John Cannon's ecosystem model and the broader movement of Legatus and others is so vital.
If an individual entrepreneur tries to do this completely alone, yes, they might very well be crushed by the economies of scale.
But if you build a robust ecosystem like Scent is trying to do with Scent Angels, their fellowship cohorts, and their supply chain networks, you start to create a parallel market.
You create a network of aligned investors who are willing to accept a slightly lower but more sustainable return on investment because they value the social good.
You create networks of suppliers and consumers who actively seek out and demand ethical goods and are willing to pay the true cost for them.
Furthermore, the compendium notes a fascinating economic reality. Treating workers with dignity actually fosters increased productivity and efficiency in the long run.
The ruthless, exploitative model is notoriously short-sighted. It leads to strikes, high turnover, low quality control, and brand destruction.
The civil economy model, where workers are treated as partners, builds a deep resilience and loyalty that outlasts market fluctuations. Virtue eventually becomes its own competitive moat.
So as we bring all of these massive concepts together, what does this actually mean for you, the listener? We've covered a tremendous amount of ground today, from Carmelite monasteries to Wall Street boardrooms, from papal encyclicals to teenage social media anxiety.
To synthesize this journey, I think we are witnessing many different streams flowing toward the exact same destination.
We see organizations like the Culture Project educating youth on their inherent dignity before they ever enter the workforce.
We see Scent Ventures forming a new generation of resilient, ethical entrepreneurs.
We see executive networks encouraging seasoned CEOs.
We see the popes recovering and applying ancient Catholic social teaching to the hyper-modern global market.
Each of these movements has its own specific vocation, but together they suggest something much larger is happening. They suggest that Catholics and believers of all backgrounds are rediscovering the blueprints that once built the greatest institutions of Western civilization.
These are the same principles that built the first hospitals, the great universities, the medieval trade guilds, and the monasteries that preserved knowledge through the Dark Ages.
The goal of all of this isn't merely to make a comfortable living. It is to build a civilization rooted in truth, beauty, and the common good.
And the direct, immediate application for the listener is to look at your own daily work through this new lens. Whether you are an executive closing a massive merger, an engineer designing a safe bridge, a teacher grading papers late at night, a tradesman fixing a pipe, or a parent making dinner for toddlers.
That labor is not a distraction from your spiritual life. It is not an interruption to your holiness. It is the very material you are using to participate in God's ongoing work of creation.
Your desk, your workshop, your kitchen, that is your monastery. That is where your sanctification happens.
I absolutely love that. Your desk is your monastery.
As we wrap up, I want to leave you with a final, slightly provocative thought to mull over on your commute. We've talked a lot today about businesses that scale, startups that succeed, apps that get millions of downloads, and founders who do things right and win.
But if our daily labor is truly an extension of divine creation, what does that mean for the businesses that ultimately fail?
What about the mundane, unseen chores that yield absolutely no worldly success, no recognition, and no profit at all?
If action truly follows being, as the saints teach us, and if the interior disposition is what matters most, is a failed business one that goes bankrupt but was run with perfect holiness, honesty, and love for its employees actually a greater eternal success than a unicorn startup that compromises its soul to reach $1 billion valuation?
It completely flips the metric of success upside down, doesn't it? It requires a total reevaluation of what we value.
It changes the entire spreadsheet.
We hope you've enjoyed this deep dive into the theology of work and the future of faith-driven entrepreneurship. We invite you to explore more conversations from Chesterton Radio, broadcast right here from the little station on Commercial Street in Atchison, Kansas.
And if you value these deep dives, we'd love for you to support the station so we can keep bringing them to you.
Keep building, keep working, and we'll see you next time.